It's 12 o'clock, so we'll call our meeting to order. If the executive assistant will please call roll.
Black. Pokrzywinski.
Here.
Wogaman.
Here.
Hecht.
Here.
Messelt.
Here.
Grinde.
Here.
Riopelle.
Here.
Okay, you've got one.
Quorum is present. So we'll start with approval of minutes of our April 11th regular meeting. Moved by George.
Second.
Second by Tim. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Approval of minutes for April 11th special meeting land acquisition.
Motion.
Moved by Tim.
Second.
Second by Mike. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. And approval of minutes of our April 11th special meeting, director evaluation.
Move.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Moving on to bills and communications, review of accounts payable for April 18th. If there's any questions on the bills.
Questions here?
No questions on bills for April 18th. Move into bills that we need approval for the May 2nd.
Move.
Second.
Moved by Josh, second by George. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Moving on to reports, delinquency update.
None. There are no delinquencies.
Financial reports for March.
I attached reports for March. Just normal activity. You can see where the cash balances are for each account. You can see where revenue and expenses are. In the MIF loan, we dispersed a loan out in March for $150,000 and to, I believe, is it still called 5Bs?
I beg your pardon?
Is it still called 5Bs?
It's actually technically 5B, but it has to do with the Buckaloos.
Yep.
And
So we actually dispersed that, and Sunshine Terrace, the only activity basically has been rent collected and a few expenses. And any questions? Nothing unusual. I think Brenda emailed them. Sorry, I was on vacation, so they didn't get in the original packet.
Any questions on the financial reports? Nope. If not, we'll move into unfinished business, cutting edge update.
I contacted Mr. Swenson. He called me back and said that he was going to be talking with his wife and then get back to me. I'm still waiting for that call. He talked to me last week, so I'm expecting a call from him together with his wife at any time so that we can talk about how that loan will be paid off.
Valley Golf Association loan payment deferral and interest waiver request.
Valley Golf Association has requested a vote on the original proposal that would defer all payments until 2023 and would also defer interest, waive all interest until 2023. And that is what is before you.
questions on what's being asked of us, or?
I think we've discussed this at length, and we've made our decision from before. So I think if we need to make a vote, we should vote on it at this time. So I make a motion that we vote on it.
Okay. Voting
Is
on.
that a motion to approve or to disapprove the request?
Yeah, correct. Is that a motion to?
A motion,
Disapprove?
motion to disapprove
Okay.
as worded.
Yes, but we need a second, don't we? Yes, please.
Do we have a second on Tim's motion? George seconds. Would the executive assistant please do roll call?
Question.
Yes.
So we vote yes to approve the motion to disapprove.
Correct.
Black? Pokrzywinski?
Yes.
Wogaman?
Yes.
Hecht?
Yes.
Messelt? Grinde?
Yes.
Riopelle?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Just for the record then, so the motion passes, but the
Disapprove.
the request is in fact denied.
That's correct. Okay. Now, at this point, you and I need to work together to make sure that the payments that have not been made do not cause any statute limitations difficulties. Okay?
Moving on to director's report.
I talked with, I made a presentation yesterday at the Kiwanis about economic development in East Grand Forks and what we're doing here. I made a presentation a few days ago to the Board of Realtors, their monthly Realtors meeting. One issue did come up, and that is the issue of the surcharge on lots that the city owns and is selling when a realtor is involved. And it's come to they were disappointed about the city's position in that regard, and it's come to my attention that at least some realtors have steered people toward lots where there is no surcharge as opposed to being city lots. Remember, we talked about that at some length, whether we wanted to have a surcharge or whether in the alternative, we wanted to increase the price and then discount when people would buy the lots. And we chose the one option, and that has been disappointing to people who could help us to sell the lots. So that is something we probably need to come back and discuss again for the impact that it's had upon possible city sales of city lots.
So that's telling me the incentives don't mean anything.
The incentives we'll get to later in this meeting,
No,
because
with the people buying or selling.
when you talk about the incentives, I presume you're talking about the incentives that are the customer-oriented incentives.
Yes.
And we need to talk about that, because remember, the revenues that we receive from the sale of lots is not adequate to fund all the incentives that are there for all the homes citywide. In addition, it's a question. I would think that your statement is a fair statement that the incentives are not adequate to make a difference in the sale of lots. And therefore, we need to think about whether that's a continuing activity that we should do. Is that an effective marketing technique to sell the city-owned lots? Or to sell lots, residential properties on the side of the river?
Right.
Okay, but that's actually, we'll be looking at that later in here and getting into discussion, and that won't be concluded today. That's something I'm sure will need additional discussion in future meetings.
Yep.
Mr. President, may I comment?
Yes.
I just wanted to, and I brought a couple of things to Mr. Gordy's attention after he had the presentation with the General Assembly of the realtors, because my wife's a realtor, And then many of them understand that I'm the city attorney as well, and the attorney that sits on this board. They brought their concerns, or several people brought their concerns to me, and just an overall general comment was that we've essentially alienated that group of people because they can buy a lot from the city, but if they're going through a realtor, the buyer's required to pay $3,000 more. And what they're basically doing is they believe as a group that buyers deserve to have representation, and when the city's not willing to work with the realtors regarding a payment of commission, it's going to be coming from the buyer. They're steering those sales
Away.
other places, and when the questions are coming up now, because that has happened, they're not even showing the lots because they know that there isn't any
Skin in the game.
well, there isn't any incentive for them to sell our lots. And so I think that it needs to be discussed and reconsidered, or some other type of an option available, because your realtors are 90% of the workforce that are going to
Move it.
sell our property for us. So I just wanted to relay that information because I didn't get phone calls. People know me, and then when they stop me at the grocery store, they stop me in the street, and those were the concerns that that were expressed.
What is it that stops people then from just going directly to us without a realtor?
I could give you one example without naming any names. There was a realtor that was actually looking at buying a lot on the, that had a client that was looking at buying a lot up on the water's edge. They contacted Mr. Gordy to find out if the city was willing to work with them regarding the discussing on commission. Mr. Gordy was not able to assist in that because of our policy. They talked to the specific individual and said that they believed that they should have representation in any of the real estate transactions, and their client declined. They went back across Grand Forks, bought a lot, and they're putting up a $600,000 house. So that's just one instance, and so based upon that, I just suggested to Mr. Gordy we should probably bring this to the city's attention and potentially revisit or reconsider how we're handling the lot sales in East Grand Forks.
I also talked with representatives from the Board of Realtors, and we're looking for a date when they can possibly participate in that discussion.
Okay. I think it's a worthy discussion. I do know that when we brought this up before, I know I got some pushback from different parts of the community.
On which part?
I want to name names.
No, like meaning, what were they pushing back about?
You're essentially, it goes to the question I asked. People can buy a lot from us. They don't need to go through a realtor. And we're essentially siphoning off a chunk of the sale to a real estate agent. I tend to agree that if you want people out there selling your product, they've got to have some incentive to do it. But not everyone agrees with that.
Is there a typical flat commission that's paid on a land sale?
Well, the discussion that we had when we had the group of people that were here was that typically if the sale is for a smaller parcel, it was a $3,000 flat commission. That's what the group that we were commissioned here, a year ago, said that it was kind of a standard, at least an amount that was typically used. So that's what the discussion was
previously.
Well, and we talked about listing our lots on the MLS, and
So do we need to give you approval for discussion, or can you just go ahead and get going on it?
I'm planning to bring that back to this body and to the city council as soon as I can work out a date with the director of the Board of Realtors and have a couple of realtors also here to represent their points of view.
it was at the council level that we got pushback on it.
Is that director, is that John Coulter?
Yes. I had a good talk with John.
If we approve something like that, does that need council approval also to approve
Does it?
commission on lots?
We can change the lot prices. If I remember correctly, we can change the lot prices without doing it for council. Where we probably need council approval is to, if we change the lot prices to include the commission, if we were to give a discount for non-realtor sales, that would, I think, need council approval because it's a discount on a price. So it's partially our responsibility and partially council responsibility. But I think if we were to do this, we'd want to have council saying this is where they want to head to.
Yeah,
So
I wouldn't
altogether-
want to go forward with something when I know there's some vocal opposition on the council level.
Also, the fund it comes out of is it's not an EDA fund. The 280 fund is a city fund.
I guess I'd like to just see where the discussions go. If it's a matter of a small commission to move these lots and get tax base on for the city, I would like to see it. I mean,
We just have to change some wording after you figured out the dollar amount. Instead of $5,000 incentive, up to $5,000 incentive.
Well, we need to talk about whether that incentive really adds to our marketing efforts too. And that's another question, a different issue.
Well, I'm sure it puts more spark. But when you got it, and the thing with the realtor, where he's going with it, after going through what I went through, it's the paperwork.
We don't know if it adds, okay, Josh, we don't know if it adds anything. And that's the difficulty, and we need to at least survey people who've done it and see if it made a difference in their decision.
Well, you're talking two different things.
We're talking
He's
two
talking
different
about
things,
the
yes.
$5,000 incentive.
Mhm.
Okay.
And that's what I'm responding to.
Yep.
One other thing, if we can move along. Remember last time we authorized an inclusion of an ad into the booklet that was being sent? Here is the booklet, here is the ad, and Monday after this ad appeared, and after this booklet was distributed, I got a phone call about persons interested in a lot. So I haven't gotten any since, but we had one.
Paid for itself.
nothing more on your report?
No, sir.
Okay. New business, any new business then?
Next page. What we have found on the policy for the sale, lease, or option of city-owned properties is there are some properties that we have been approached for a possible purchase of that have no opportunity for construction of a building. People need it for a little bit of parking space, but it's so full of easements that nothing can be built on it, or they're looking for some maneuvering space or something of that nature. For those properties, what we're finding is the appraisal likely exceeds the dollar value, and our policy requires that the purchaser also pay for the appraisal and for the legal costs that are necessary for the sale of those properties. What we'd like to do is for those types of properties is be able to use the assessed value as the starting point for a discussion of the value of those properties and save the dollars that would otherwise be used for the appraisal. That saves the consumer the possible purchaser money. I mean, the first step is always determine, do we need the property for some purpose? But once we determine that it is a property that could be sold, then do we need to go to an appraisal, or can we find a more cost-effective way of determining a fair value for that property.
How many lots are we talking about?
There are only a few, and people have managed to find the ones that
Okay.
fit that, but there are only a few.
And this is where I think my comments have gone before, is I think we should have a map of the lots that we're talking about, because before we can even make those types of decisions, we've got to know whether or not we want to keep them, we want to sell them, we want to lease them possibly and keep them, and or know what exact area that we're talking about. It's hard to make a decision to say, let's just start with the assessed value, because if you start with the assessed value and you're negotiating, that number only goes down. And typically, and I can't point to anything specific because I don't know what lot we're talking about, but typically, even though there's a mandate in the state that your assessed value is supposed to be within 10% of the fair market value, that doesn't necessarily transfer over to each and every lot. So these lots might be totally undervalued even from the beginning. So you're going to just be negotiating from a point of weakness, so to speak, and going down. I think that you need to have some type of a policy that takes that into consideration, that maybe you have a percentage over the assessed value that you start with, so you have some negotiating room if you truly want to sell them. But the starting point has to be identifying the lots, making a determination if we even want to sell them or not, or lease them, or just hold them as they are. You know, and if we don't know what those are at this point, it's hard to make a policy change. That's my 2 cents.
So let's get a list together.
What has happened is people have come in first before that list has been compiled. And rather than put them off forever or for an indeterminate amount of time, we've dealt with those requests as they have been received. What Mr. Galsett has said is absolutely an appropriate way and a better way to do this. But we have had requests, and we've been dealing with those requests. But we need to look at it in its entirety. And the whole policy is designed to deal with the entire group of lots and parcels that the city owns, as opposed to doing it on a piecemeal basis. But the questions we've been asked have been done on a piecemeal basis to date. That being the case, if we start with the assessed value, you want to set a percentage, say 50% above the assessed value as a starting point for negotiations. And I'm throwing out a number for consideration.
I guess my whole comment is going to be, this lot might be just assessed at $500. Then you might want to go 50% over that. I don't, when you have no foundation for discussion, how do you make any type of a decision? Because we should really have before us the lots that we're talking about, even if it's these piecemeal lots that somebody's presenting to you, and what the assessed value is, so at least you can look at them from a standpoint of knowledge to be able to discuss where you should go with the sales price. I just don't know how you do it without those.
Right. I agree.
So if I hear the EDA correctly, what you'd like to do is you'd like to see all the properties, you'd like to see the assessed value for each property, and then make a determination of what you want to do with the price, with the starting price for negotiations.
Yes.
Yes. Mr. Moore, do you have a comment?
I've done a lot of this, as you know, but, in your position, I think I would start with what are you willing to offer when you come in on any particular piece, because this property naturally has a value to them for a specific reason. So So what are you willing to offer? And then you have a starting point then to go back and look at what the assessed value is and decide. And you could always counter them or do whatever, but you could avoid the appraisal part. What are you willing to pay versus?
We still have to identify what the lots are, though. We
Well,
should,
regardless,
we should have
if
them,
it offers you for something, then you look at it and make a
Right.
decision.
but we should have something identified in advance, the lots that we could possibly be selling.
I agree with what Ron said, though, too, is it'll be tough to even determine for us if that's a correct value based on the assessed value or not. I mean, like you said, it might be low, and we might look at it and say, oh, okay, they're offering this much over the assessed value, but if we had a full appraisal done, would it potentially be thousands more? You know, I don't think any single one of us in here can determine what the value of a piece of land is. And I think it would be tough to even approach a realtor and ask them if they could do a market analysis on it and pay them a fee for it, when to appraise commercial land isn't necessarily up their alley either. I think I guess think it'll be very tough to determine, even on a case-by-case basis, of is this land valued accurately on the assessed value, and if we sell it for more than that, did we get a good deal or not?
So I'll just bring this back when we put everything together.
Do we need any more than the ability to use an exception to the appraisal requirement on small parcels of property that can be built on?
Well, let's take a look. Ron has suggested a different approach. Let's take a look at going through the properties that way and evaluating, and every department has to be involved in that evaluation of whether the properties have a use for the city or no use for the city. And once we determine there's surplus, instead of selling any piece, that we provided as an alternative the purchase of property which has not been identified as surplus. This will just move every piece of property into whether it's surplus or not. And if it's surplus property, we'll deal with value, and if it's not surplus property, then it has to be declared surplus before we can go into the process. Okay?
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. We'll move on to our marketing plan. Strategic plan includes webpage and social media.
At your last meeting, we talked about a website. We talked about a marketing campaign. And you asked me to put together a marketing plan. The marketing plan is a subset of the strategic plan. So what I have put together for you is a strategic plan that has some major gaps in it, and a marketing plan that can grow out of that strategic plan. And what we need to do is, as a group, work through those gaps on the strategic plan, answer the questions so we can fully develop that plan and move forward. Those gaps will do things like identify what it is that we want to be. It'll identify what types of target businesses and target audiences we're looking at, and things of that nature. And that way we will know where we're headed and what we have to do to get there. And the marketing program will be one way to get us to that point. You may or may not wish to discuss this at this meeting. We may want to start answering some of the questions, or you may want to take this home and start answering some of the questions yourselves, and then we can come back and discuss it at greater length at our next meeting. Created a lot of dead air, didn't it?
We gotta read now.
My recommendation would be look at this, review it, you have questions today, ask the questions today, but come back and start answering these questions yourselves. And then we can discuss what our answers are at our next meeting or meeting in meetings. Because there is a lot of thought that you have to do as you're going through here. And I don't know that an off-the-cuff response would be the most effective response for the community. This is a very, very important document for our moving forward.
Well, there's some of these short-term goals I think we've been discussing for quite a while, and we really should start moving on them. I mean, our web presence needs a fix, and we haven't been able to decide on a way forward on that, and I think we should.
In the interim, what I'd like to propose for that is there are a couple of pages regarding the residential lots that we don't have the incentive program, for example, posted on the web page. I'd like to add a couple of those pages, and I'd like to talk briefly about, create a page that talks briefly about industrial and commercial systems and programs that we have. And at least we put those on so we have an interim web page that's more expansive than what we have today. What I want to do and what I suggest to you is that our long-term fixes for the web page, we need to know if that's going to be an effective approach, or whatever we put on there, if that's going to be an effective approach to implement the strategic plan. And yes, there are some short-term things that we need to do right now, but those short-term things may be adjusted as well. And I'd like to, before we spend any dollars on that, any real dollars on that, make sure we know where we're headed. That's my recommendation to you.
Okay.
So does everybody want to take this home, review it, and come up with information on their own and bring it back? Or is there anything anybody would like to discuss today?
Let's bring it back to the next meeting.
No, thank you.
Mr. Moore, did you have anything for us? No other comments or questions? We have a motion for adjournment.
Motion.
Second.
By Black, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Meeting adjourned.